Welcome to Teaching Peace. This series of conversations is the result of a collaboration between New York City Council of Mennonite Churches, Groundswell, and Brooklyn Peace Center. We begin each episode by acknowledging the land upon which these organizations sit. We recognize that we are located in Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Lenape people. We acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement is part of our ongoing work to dismantle the legacies of settler colonialism and white supremacy. On Teaching Peace, we engage in conversation with clergy and clinicians, artists and activists, and community leaders and practitioners to explore various pedagogies of peace building from across disciplines and socioeconomic and geographic contexts. For the first half of this season, we were in conversation with leaders of peace centers from around the world. As we begin the second half of this season, we are talking with a variety of peacemakers. My name is Jason Storbakken. I serve at Manhattan Mennonite Fellowship as pastor and as co-director of Brooklyn Peace Center.
And I'm Addie Banks, Executive Director of the Groundswell Group and Chair of the Education Committee of the New York City Council of Mennonite Churches and a former pastor. In this episode of Teaching Peace, we are in conversation with Iris de León-Hartshorn. Iris is a powerful peacemaker. She has served Mennonite Central Committee since 1996 to 2007, and currently Mennonite Church USA from 2007 to the present in various leadership roles. Previously, the denominations, sorry about that, just had a blip. Previously, Iris served as the denomination's Director of Transformative Peacemaking in Portland, Oregon, where she's now a resident. And also today, she is Associate Executive Director for Operations, a new position that encapsulates the roles of Chief of Staff and key advisor to the Executive Director of Mennonite Church USA. She has been a strong advocate for racial and gender justice in the church and its related institutions. Her background intersects with many cultures, and you will see some of that interesting intersectionality today. Welcome, Iris, to Teaching Peace.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We always start with this question. How do you define peace?
Yeah, when I saw that question, I your first thought is, oh, some easy answer, but there's not an easy answer to that question. So I'm going to try to explain my thinking about what peace means. And I always kind of think through the lens of shalom.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm talking about shalom, I'm talking about the interconnections of creation, humanity, and God. That, in the end of it all is how we are all reconciled together, all those three elements. And that happens in many different ways. Many different people take different pieces of that to work at. But I think in the end, that is what God is calling us to. I don't think peace is passive, because for me, if there's no justice, there is no peace. So it's peace is kind of, people think, oh, it's peace, everyone gets along, it's all wonderful. But it's not that easy. One of my favorite books is from Walter Wink, The Powers That Be. And I just want to read this one part where it just seems, I must okay, well, I lost that one. But basically what it says is part of the job of peace is bringing out the conflict.
Yes.
Because if you don't bring out the conflict, you cannot get rid of the poison that is underneath that conflict. And if you can't get rid of that poison, the conflict continues, or the injustice continues, whatever that conflict, what the bottom piece of that whole conflict is. And people may see that, well, that's a mean thing, that's not very nice. But I think if you really love people, even people that you may not agree with, if you really love them, wouldn't you want to free them from that poison, from that conflict? And so that's why peace is such it's a strange word in the sense that most people see it as something idyllic, something peaceful. And I'm not saying that isn't part of it. I think that there is such a thing, even as peacemakers, that at times we have to still our own hearts. We have to find that inner peace for ourselves. We have to find ways of letting go and being content for what we can do, and being able to let go of what we can't. And so there's a different kind of peace for that. But when I'm talking about as being an activist or advocating, it is not always the idyllic running down the grass, happy and
Flower in your ear.
yeah, flowers. Yeah, reminds me of the song.
Flower child.
Yeah, going to San Francisco with flowers in your hair. I wish it was that, but it isn't. It's tough work.
Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate the language about how part of the job of peace is to bring out conflict.
Yeah.
There's so many layers going on there. And kind of a follow-up question to how do you define peace is, how do you define enemy?
That was, when I saw that one, that was also a complex, difficult answer. Because if we really, again, if I go back to shalom, and if I really see every human being created by God, how can they be my enemy? I may not agree with them. I may think even their actions are horrible. May even think there has to be some discipline, for what they've done. But it's hard for me to call them an enemy because they are a child of God. They were created by God. And I think one of the hard lessons I've learned was when we adopted our two children who were severely abused their first 5 years of life. The person that did that to them, it was hard for me to see that person as anything but evil. And when you start to learn that person's own story of how they were abused, how they were neglected, how they were treated, it's not an excuse for what they did, or it's not an excuse of what they become. But we have to be compassionate to understand those things influence people. And sometimes people at that early age and how they're formed and what happens to them is beyond their control. And whether they become mentally ill after that, or psychotic, or whatever happens, or in their life, I have to remember they were created God's image. They were created as a child of God, and what happened to them was what human beings did to them. Not what God did to them.
Yeah.
And I look I look at Trump. I don't know this, I could say this or not.
Sure.
I look at Trump, and the things he's done, and it really makes me angry.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm thinking, what happened to him as a child that made him the way he was? Something happened, and it makes me sad.
And some right.
I
And
don't
some
really like to call people enemy. I'd rather say I don't agree with them.
yeah.
I they may be, I do think there is evil in the world. They may be evil, but when it comes down to it, I also have to tell myself they were created by God.
Their actions, looking at their actions, naming actions is evil, but recognizing the person who is God's image bearer. That helps to separate animosity, anger, and hatred towards others. Wow.
Yeah. And Iris, your own story, I always call you one of my women of hope, because your own storied past is very powerful, and how you were shaped and formed by the various kinds of experiences you had as a woman who now is Native American, as a woman who grew up as Mexican. Your own experiences basically have brought you to a different kind of place than someone like a Donald Trump. You grew up Catholic, you dabbled with the Presbyterians and the Baptists, but you eventually found your way to the Mennonites, to the Anabaptists. Share with us a little bit of your journey to the Mennonite Church and what has kept you. You were enlightened and you were disillusioned, but you have stayed.
Well, let me first say about my Catholic upbringing. One of the things I am so grateful about my Catholic upbringing, and I think that has grounded me, and this is where I have my tension with the Anabaptist belief around purity, I'll just say. The one thing that Catholics kind of grind in your mind is that you're a human being.
Yeah.
That's important to remember.
Right. Yeah. You are not perfect. You are not God. Yeah. And so like when things come up, like in the Mennonite Church, when people say somebody committed abuse or this or that, and people are shocked, I hate to say I'm not always shocked because okay, well, you know what? They're human being.
Yeah.
They messed up. And sometimes I can actually see like people that have those tendencies. And yet we have a church, and I'm not saying the whole church, but this purity piece hides a lot of stuff. And people hide under it. Instead of admitting, yeah, I am not perfect. I have sinned. And the piece about the Catholics that taught me is it's okay to admit your sin. It's okay to confess your sin. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
But anyway, I left the Catholic Church when I was about 16. I actually wanted to become a nun. Because I've always felt this devotion to God, and I really knew I wanted to do something with that. But I remember going to the priest, where the priests are, to make an appointment to talk to them about what I had to do to eventually go into the convent. And the priest answered the door, and he was as drunk as he could be. And I came from an alcoholic family. My father was an alcoholic. And I looked at him. You want me to come in? I said, no, thanks. And I walked away saying, you know what? I get this at home. Why would I want it?
Right.
There. No, thanks. And so I left the Catholic Church. And then I was looking for someplace, and I was in high school. And one of my friends said, hey, come to the Presbyterian Church. I went there. And I stayed there for quite a few years, maybe 3-4 years. And then as I was reading the Bible, I said, I want to be baptized as a follower of Jesus. And I didn't know too much about other religions. And they said to me, well, your Catholic baptism is good enough. I said, but I was a baby. That wasn't my decision.
Yeah.
I want to make that decision. And so
true Anabaptist.
Yeah, they wouldn't baptize me because of that. And this is the funny part of this whole story, is my sister was going to Southern Baptist Church. And she says, oh, my pastor will baptize you. Well, I wasn't clued. I know this sounds strange, but you have to think I'm 19 at that time.
Right.
I wasn't clued into baptism meant I was joining the church.
Oh,
I thought he was just going to baptize me.
wow. Now you got church membership.
So I go there, I talk to him, he said, oh yeah, he'd be happy to baptize me. Did I accept Jesus as my savior? The whole thing. I said yes and everything. So the big deal, and I get baptized. And then afterwards he says, hey, everyone come up and, greet our new member. And I'm like, member?
Give her the right hand of fellowship and she's in.
Yeah, start assigning you to committee work, and there you go.
And then, my sister was going there, and I thought, okay, well, I'll just check out the Southern Baptist. I'm a member now. And I met my husband there, so maybe it was just to be,
Divine appointment, Iris.
Yes.
But what the Southern Baptists gave me though was the appreciation for scripture.
Yeah.
And this was before what was considered the Southern Baptist takeover by the conservatives.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it is now.
Yeah.
But they gave me a real appreciation for the scripture. And so I do, I want to say that I did appreciate that. I know all the different churches I went to, I did learn and I gained something from them.
Right.
And I appreciate that. The Mennonite church is something that just rang true to me, around justice, especially around peace. It was so important to me. And I felt, before I got in, that this is what they were all about. And, no denomination is perfect. That's what I've learned along my road. You kind of pick the one that best fits you. And, if you decide to stay, then you do the best that you can, knowing that, that people will fail you. You will fail yourself. But you stay committed. And that's kind of why I've stayed committed to, the Mennonite Church. And I've met so many wonderful people and I love them and their family. I mean, Addie, you and I have known each other for so long.
You're soul sisters.
I know if I ran into problems, I'm in New York, I know I can call Addie. It's that family feeling and really the love I have felt by many people, in the Mennonite Church. And I know some people think I'm a thorn in the side, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
A loving one, but lovingly.
We need something to poke us and provoke us sometimes.
Yeah.
You've been on quite a journey, Iris, from Catholic to Presbyterian to Baptist to a prophetic witness within the Mennonite Church, within the church body. And you've been a key leader in organizing the Hope for the Future conference, which gathers Anabaptist leaders of color. The next conference theme is collective trauma and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
What's the role of trauma in your work?
I think the thing with trauma, is, let me just say a couple of things about trauma itself, is that groups of people actually form stronger bonds around trauma than they do around victory. Things. And the trauma, if we don't talk about the trauma, if we don't find ways to release the trauma, not just mentally, but even from our body, is that we will wound other people with that trauma. And I think a good example is the Middle East. I think, you know, when you look at what's going on in the Middle East, how could a group that was so oppressed, and you know, what happened to them in Germany, turn around and, you know, oppress another group of people? It's because if you don't release that trauma, that's what happens. And like, so for people of color, I think, you know, we have a right to be angry. We have a right to ask for what we need. We have a right to no longer be colonized or to be oppressed. But we don't have a right to traumatize other people in the process. I'm not saying all people of color would agree with me on that, but again, that's the other dynamic thing of peace. But I do know the reality is that I have to admit, sometimes I know I probably have traumatized other people because I'm, but I think that that's why this next hope for the future, because of the pandemic, Black Lives Matter issue, the escalation of violence against Black and brown people, the escalation of violence against the Asian community. There was a lot of stuff going on. And because we couldn't go out, we couldn't meet.
So much.
Just had built up. And I think for us being together, talking about this, letting it go, doing whatever we need to do to let it go, is something we have to do. And then we have to keep moving forward. We can't allow that trauma to stop us.
Yeah, trauma can be healed. That's the good news, that we know that trauma can be healed.
Yeah.
Even multiply wounded communities can be healed. So yes. Well,
Yeah.
Iris, there's often a tension between the work of reconciliation and the work of liberation. Where do you see that kind of tension in your work?
Oh,
Reconciliation and liberation.
that is like the toughest.
You
Oh
lived
my
it.
gosh. You know, geez. I kind of, I'll just be honest, I just kind of had it to when people want to say, well, let's talk about reconciliation, when they've done nothing around liberation, around change, even helping to change the system. It's like, you know, it's like, well, we'll treat you better, but we're not going to change anything. And then even when, you know, I'll give you an example. We have this hope for the future, you know, but we've also encouraged white leaders and white allies to form their own group, to work on their own stuff. And I mean, I've been to the top of the white leadership of white people saying this, you know, and what happens is they either want a person of color to organize it for them, which tells me you still don't get what we're trying to tell you here. And then if a person of color doesn't organize it for them, then they want to blame us for not helping them. And at one point, white people have to take the responsibility and do their own learning, do their own organizing, if they're serious about reconciliation. And I'm at the point of, I don't want to talk about reconciliation unless I see that you're serious about liberation and working on these structures that oppress people. And I'm not just talking about people of color, I'm talking about LGBTQ people too.
Yes.
People that are disabled. I'm talking about the poor, the whole system. If you're not serious, do not be talking to us about reconciliation.
Yeah. Goes back to what you said earlier, no justice, no peace. Liberation comes before reconciliation.
We
And
have
an
it in the
emphasis,
fight. So there is no reconciling because we haven't been conciled.
Right.
Right. Now, and I separate this from forgiveness
Yeah, yeah.
only because
Mhm.
forgiveness is for my own healing. You know what I mean?
The
I can
release.
someone, but it doesn't mean I want to reconcile with them because they haven't done their work.
And it also doesn't mean that they're forgiven. Just because you've forgiven them, they may
Right.
not be able to receive the gift of forgiveness yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that is the
so-
first part of the reconciliation piece. Don Shriver wrote a book on reconciliation. That's the first thing he says, that we can't do that until we do the forgiveness. You can't just be reconciled with somebody. You have to do that process to get to reconciliation.
Right.
Yeah. And before the reconciliation, before the liberation comes the reckoning.
The
Things-
reckoning,
I mean,
has to
that
be
that
a
comes
reckoning.
the bringing out
that's
of the
the runaway
conflict.
place. Yeah.
You know, that's kind of bringing out the conflict and getting that poison out of there.
Yeah. So I'm
No,
interested.
don't run from the reckoning. Yes.
Yeah. So I have a question. No justice, no peace. Liberation before reconciliation. An emphasis on the vulnerable. One thing that has kept me in the Mennonite Church has been, like you said, Iris, this emphasis on justice and peace. And recently, the abolition curriculum, which really names the slave legacy of policing, like historically roots it there. Where else in the church are you seeing little maybe breakouts of liberation where there might be movement of the Holy Spirit that is this liberating spirit among the Mennonites, among the
Well,
Christian church?
You know, I want to say that there are a lot of pastors out there, and Jason, you're one of them. But I think also Melissa Flor Bixler,
Yes.
some of the work she is doing,
Mhm.
work Isaac Villegas is doing. I mean, I could name a bunch of other pastors.
Erica Liasimka. Yes.
I see it happening in communities, that they're working in their own communities. And, you know, we put this peace justice fund to encourage churches to connect with peace and justice groups within their community.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to be religious,
Mhm.
but, you know, I'm trying to be, you know, that hold similar values. And I said, and take the leadership of people of color in their communities. You know, don't go, you know, for a long time, I think Mennonites sometimes have thought they had the answer and would, you know, go in and say, hey, you know, here we are, and, you know, take leadership. No, I'm asking them, don't take the leadership,
Yeah.
but join people of color in your communities already doing the work. And I see a lot of churches doing that. That just gives me so much hope. You know, and when we did the abolition curriculum, when that came out, unfortunately, the first people you hear from are people that think you've gone off your rocker. You know, what is your teaching? You know, they're trying to make it political. They want to, and here's the other piece about justice and peace is a lot of times the argument is we want to have an equal conversation. That's a false equivalency.
Yeah, it is.
You know, you can't, how do you have an equal, because they're saying, well, the police should be equally featured there on their side of it.
Yeah, right. That's not how it exactly
Just
works.
like-
We're trying to stay in the truth, the historical truth, and not create fabricated narratives.
Exactly. I mean, you just have to look at the statistics.
And
You-
do the power analysis. How is it going to be equal
Exactly.
at unequal power?
Mhm. But I mean, but this is the kind of arguments that, you know, people want to get into. And then, you know, a lot of times it's like they want to criticize something they haven't even read.
Don't even know what it means.
Right. Haven't
it's
done
like-
the work.
You didn't even read it. You know, and what there might be a piece in there that might even touch your heart. How do you know if you don't even read it? You just want to criticize it. So that part is disheartening. But the other part is that I just see a lot of churches really committed to working in their communities. That gives hope.
Yeah.
And that is such a great tool. I'm so grateful for that tool. We can use that tool anywhere.
Yeah. And you know, where are we getting a lot of requests? Outside the church.
You know, honestly, I started hearing about it more so.
From
Even
other-
I get all the emails, but from friends.
Yeah.
I have a friend up at Hope Hell's Kitchen. It's a little church in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. And he came out to visit me and he said, wow, it's amazing what the Mennonites have done, creating this curriculum about, you know, the abolition of really, it leads into the militarization of policing and mass incarceration and all of these things. I have a friend, pastor of a little storefront Pentecostal church, and she knew about this work, and that's what got me fired up. I was like, what am I sitting here for? I got to lean into this. In Manhattan Mennonite, there may be folks there who want to wrestle with this holy curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that Mennonites are known for a lot of good curriculum out there, but our own people don't take advantage of it. And
Right.
you know, I wish they would.
Melding curriculum and practice is one of our challenges. We're going to move into it. As Jason says, we're going to lean into that.
Lean
So
into it. Promises
Byron-
before us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last question. I think we're the last question. The
Yeah.
last question is two parts. The work of peace building often takes generations. First, how do you maintain that deep vision? And second, where do you find joy to sustain you in this work?
Okay. Well, I think the generational work, that's important. And like for me, what I'm doing now is that I'm trying to let go of a lot of the stuff that I've done, but passing it on to younger people. But being there to support them if they have questions, if they need support, I want to be there for them, as you know, as long as I can, to support them in that. But at some point, my generation has to let it go and allow that next generation to build upon it. They're going to have new insights. They're going to have new ways of seeing things. And they may have answers that we didn't have. And we need to allow them to do that. So I think we have to be intentional about passing that. We cannot just pretend it's going to happen or hope it's going to happen. But I think every peacemaker should seek out 2, 3, 4 people that they want to mentor and eventually hand over what knowledge they have.
Yeah.
Let them decide what they do with that knowledge. But that they will continue that work. I think the second question about sustaining, it's I have probably used 3 main things. One is when I was a lot younger and I was crazy in the sense of doing too many things, involved in too many issues all at once. I eventually just had to get a spiritual director to center me, to slow me down, to make me think through what was realistic that I could really do and do well, and to let go of the things that may be important to me, but I just had to pray that other people were picking those pieces up, that I couldn't do everything. So that has been one thing that's been really helpful for me. The other thing is I did a 3-day workshop on the Enneagram and found out what I was on the Enneagram, which was, I'm not afraid to say, number 8.
What is the 8, Iris?
Oh gosh, the 8 is okay. The good part of the 8, you could be Martin Luther King. The bad part of the 8, you could be Hitler.
Oh my, quite a spectrum.
quite a spectrum.
I think you definitely lean towards King. I see that.
And that's back to that formation story. All the experiences that you've had have led you more to King, not to, I don't want to say the other name.
Yeah, but you know,
Yes.
it's that tendency. Unfortunately, 8s have they're considered leaders, but they have a tendency to want it their way. So I really have to watch that. I just have to. So one of the things I learned about the Enneagram is that I have to lean to 2, which is caring for people.
Oh. Yeah.
Because, you know, when you want it your way, and if you're really focused to that, you're not caring about people, what other people think or feel. So I've had to work at leaning toward 2 to kind of balance. So I'm not in the shadow side of 8. So that's been a good tool for me. It's been a good measure.
Yeah.
And the last thing is music. I love music. You know, my mom was a concert pianist. I grew up with music. I play the guitar, so I use that as a way just to, relax and get away from all the stuff. So those are the kind of 3 things that have really kept me centered.
Mm.
I mean, and when I talk about, you know, the spiritual direction part, I mean, also, you know, that has to do with scripture and centering on that and helping me look through my life through those lenses. So I found that really helpful with the spiritual director.
Thank you.
Iris, this has been such a great delight for me, and I miss you more than ever now that I've had this hour with you. So come here soon, or I have to come here.
I know.
We've had a very meaningful and robust conversation, and I want to say inspirational as well.
Amen. Yes.
We like to finish on a personal note, and all of this has been personal, but just a little fun. So
Okay.
let's do a lightning round of either or so that we can learn a little bit more about you.
Okay.
On time, early, or running late?
On time.
Tea or coffee?
Tea.
Drama or comedy? Comedy drama.
I know that's a hard one. Comedy.
Ocean or mountains?
Ocean.
Big party or small gathering?
Small gathering.
Sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Super strength or super speed?
Super strength.
Oh, all right.
Singing or dancing?
Singing.
Thank you, Iris, for playing our lightning round. Jason, let's do our closure.
Iris, thank you. This has been wonderful to gather and to listen to you and to have this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Just a quick shout out to my friend Haki Octanis. He gave me this shirt today, Champion Pizza. He went from homeless on the Bowery to owning 7 pizza shops in New York City. Some of the best pizza in the Lower East Side. So thank you to all who tuned in for this conversation. If you want to hear more of these conversations, whether you're listening on a podcast or watching on YouTube, remember to like, subscribe, and share. And again, thank you for joining us for Teaching Peace.
Walk in the way.
Man.
Thank you.
Man.